Hello, it's so good to see you again. And if you're visiting for the first time, I hope you enjoy your visit and will come back and explore with us often. My name is Ian and I look forward to getting to know you too. Welcome. I really like exploring new places, and my job often puts me in a place I've never been to before, and it's always fun to find out what's close by and to take time to visit. Sometimes there are some lovely surprises and I make a note and try and visit again, and other times perhaps not so much. No matter where I am, I like to take a look at a map so that I don't get too lost and I can explore without worrying. Come on, let me tell you what I think. I love maps, and while looking around for them to show you, I discovered I have quite a collection of them. There are all kinds of maps, aren't there? These small pieces are part of a sea map called a chart. You'd think that out at sea you wouldn't need a map, but it's quite interesting to see how much is shown on these charts. I remember having to help make chart corrections every month when I was at sea. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. What could possibly change out here? But all sorts of things do change. So for example, a lighthouse may no longer be flashing in the way it was before, or there might be a shallow channel that was not there before and the sand under the water has shifted. And so now a different part of the channel is navigable. Those things are sort of important to know, aren't they? For many years we owned a caravan. Here they call it a travel trailer. There's one on the village green of the model railway you may have noticed before. Ours was newer and bigger than that, but still quite small for 4 of us and a dog, and we lived in it for several weeks at a time, but we loved it. When we decided to go camping, there were several things we needed to do. And one important thing was to make sure we knew which was the best way to go to the campsite. Towing a huge travel trailer made it very important not to take a wrong turn, because turning around on some of those narrow roads in England or Europe was never going to end well. Then, once we got to the campsite, we would use a different kind of map. These maps were walking maps, and the detail is much greater, but they cover a much smaller area. These maps show things like footpaths and how steep the hills are and that sort of thing, so that we can plan a nice walk without needing climbing equipment. My next door neighbour used to draw maps, and he was called a cartographer. His name was Alan, and he worked for the company that makes these kinds of maps. Another sort of map is this kind of thing. It's called a schematic diagram, but it's really a map. And this one is representation of the track plan for the model railway. Each track is here represented in a sorted out way so that it's easy to follow. And that's a bit like the famous London Underground map that really doesn't show distance or anything like that, but shows where the trains go and where the lines interconnect. Of course, once you know the route you need to follow, you don't usually need to refer to that part of the map again quite so often. Although it's always good to check back from time to time, isn't it? These days, satellite mapping systems pop up on our phones and give us things like roadworks or accidents, and it's all done on a little screen. Isn't it interesting how maps have changed so very much in such a short time? Here's an old map I found in a box that I was looking through that I'm sure nobody had been into for quite a while. It took my interest because it says Railway Map of the British Isles on the cover. And I wonder if that shows lines from before the closures of the 1960s. When I was really small, someone called Lord Beeching closed a lot of lines in Britain. And railway enthusiasts often have something to say about the Beeching Acts. But actually many of the closed lines are now used to run historical preserve trains, like this one I rode on not too long ago. These days this map would look a lot different and perhaps would need to show the closed lines as preserved lines or walking trails. But once I got to study this particular map a little bit, it turned out to be much older than the 1960s. There's a few clues. It says on the front 4.5D, that's old pence in England. And that money system changed in 1971, so we already know the map is older than that. Let's take a look, shall we? Look at all those railway lines. It says things in old ways here. It says railways shown thus here at the bottom. Look. A few places I knew to look, and here's one of them. It says Giggleswick. That's a great name, isn't it? Giggleswick. And I'll be in trouble with the pronunciation police if I'm not careful. Well, that station got its name in 1877, so we know that the map is newer than that. And this station here, called Bishopsbourne, closed in 1940, so it's older than that. South Wold is still marked, so somewhere then between 1879 and 1929. If we kept digging, we'd find the map dates from around 1900. And one of the tiny details I almost missed is on the front cover here. Once I folded the map back up, I noticed a penciled name on the top. You might be able to see it there. That's Hillary's great aunt, who was the first lady dentist in Ireland. All very interesting, isn't it? The trouble with maps is that they aren't any good if you leave them at home. You have to take them with you and read them. And on top of that, you have to know how to read them. Some of the symbols and ways of looking at them are a bit confusing unless you're doing it all the time and you're really used to the squiggles and symbols. When we've been going to visit friends we've never visited before, or a walk in the hills in England, several things are really important. First, you have to know where you are. That's sometimes the biggest problem, actually. And then you need to know where you're going, and that too can be a real issue, can't it? In Atlanta, for example, there are dozens of roads called Peachtree something or other. So you really need to know which peach tree you're looking for. And then, of course, you have to trust the cartographer, the map drawer. How many times have you heard in your lifetime, "Oh, this map is wrong"? And in our house, we sometimes hear that when I'm driving and Hillary is reading the map. Really, the problem is usually that Hillary can't find where we are on the map. And that's because Hillary is a better driver than me, and I'm a better map reader than she is. Psalm 25 has something to say about map reading. Let me show you what I mean. See here in verse 4. Show me the right path, O Lord. Point out the road for me to follow. That's like saying, show me the path, cartographer. And some of the things we've already talked about relate to this psalm too, though. So to ask God for direction and look for it in the Bible can be confusing. And if you aren't already doing that and used to reading the map, it can be even more difficult. So verse 3 says, no one who trusts you will ever be disgraced. And verse 8, the Lord is good and does what is right. He shows the proper path to those who go astray. But how? I can hear a new Bible reader saying, oh, this map is wrong. And all the time it's because the reader isn't sure where they are or if they can trust who wrote it and what they're reading. And I remember travelling to a lovely campsite in the southwest of England and wondering why the roads were getting really narrow and narrower and narrower. And I thought, well, I've followed the map and I did it very carefully, and I even checked a second map. I was so sure I was going the right way. But then I read the instructions on the campsite information and it said, road from the north not suitable for large vehicles. And I asked out loud, well, why wasn't there a sign? And from beside me, Hillary said, there was a sign. You were too busy listening to the talking map and didn't read it. We passed it a few miles ago. And I could have asked, well, why didn't you tell me? But I knew the answer, and that would have been shifting the blame from me making a silly mistake onto someone else, and it would have been quite unfair. So for maps and guides to be effective, you have to pay attention to them, and it's usually a good idea to read them before you drive on by. At one of the airports I travel through quite a lot, there is an announcement and a sign that says, "Please do not take strollers onto the escalator." But it can only be seen well after the person is already on the escalator. And those silly signs are something that I find quite fun, but they really aren't helpful, are they? And since we're talking about silly signs, here's another one. Fireplace may be hot. Psalm 25 has some information in it that we kind of need to see before we read just verse 4 with the "Show me the right path, O Lord, point out the road for me to follow." Let's take a look. Right there at the start it has a clue or two in verse 1 and 2. "O Lord, I give my life to you," and verse 2, "I trust in you, my God." So the author starts out by saying, look, I totally trust you with this, and I know you're trustworthy. And see there in verse 3, "No one who trusts in you will ever be disgraced." And only then is verse 4 going to work, "Point out the road for me to follow." But the author seems to answer his own requests later there in verse 9 and 10. He says God leads. It's not that we need to keep asking, which way should I go, or show me the path I should take. But verse 9 says, He leads the humble in doing right, teaching them His way. Perhaps that happens better when we're constantly in contact with God and referring to the different parts of His instruction guide often. God doesn't guide harshly either. His ways are laid out in His life map, the Bible, but He shows us ways carefully and gently, like a good friend. And verse 14 says, "The Lord is a friend to those who fear Him." I like to sit and look at maps and explore places I'm going to visit, but I also like to look at maps of places I've already been, and I want to see if there would have been another way of getting where I was going, or to see exactly where I went and how far I walked, or something like that. I read the Bible, life's spiritual map, in much the same way. The difference perhaps is that I know the cartographer personally. Let me know your favourite part of the life map, the Bible. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Thinking Out Loud. Let your friends know about this series of videos, and if you haven't already, click the subscribe button. Until next time, goodbye.